Welcome to another episode of Compassionate Coexistence, a podcast to help you cultivate connection and honor Earth. I'm Lex Sylvie, your fellow traveler on this journey toward hope, healing, and harmony for all beings. Today we have an episode regarding the project's pillars of connecting to self and reconnecting to the natural world. Our guide today is Angela Prider, a somatic counselor, animist healer, and ceremonialist who has spent more than 20 years in training and initiation with indigenous wisdom keepers. As a healer, Angela is known for holding a sacred space of compassion for her clients, and also for creating a bridge between ancient and modern spirituality and healing. Her offerings are rooted in a lifelong kinship with nature and conscious living. She also is a psychedelic mentor who encourages her clients to form a deep relationship with plants. She has been a guest speaker at the Simon Fraser University and the Canadian Society of Addiction Medicine and Spirit Plant Medicine Conference held at the University of British Columbia. She led a 2016 trip to Ireland through Sacred Earth Journeys called Journey to Ireland, Healing the Ancestral Heart, and also has worked for 10 years as a counselor in the areas of youth career transition, women's spirituality, addiction treatment, and harm reduction in outpatient services. Angela, thank you so much for being here with us today. Can you start by telling us more about the twists and the turns of your spiritual search and how you figured out where you felt you belonged?
Yes, I was born and raised in Australia, and I have ancestry from Ireland and parts of Cornwall, but mostly Ireland, and but many generations. Um, we have been in Australia probably 6 or 7 generations, and so I grew up really in that Irish Catholic way, and going to mass every week and going to Catholic school. Lived in a pretty Catholic neighborhood, you know, and I didn't actually realize how much I was being raised in this Irish Catholic way until I actually went to Ireland many years later, and I was like, oh my God, it was kind of weird. And then, really, by the time I was in my late teens, when I was growing up, I did not have a diagnosis. I later came to understand that, I have ADHD, but so school was not an easy place for me at all. And I was a very creative, sensitive child. There was quite a lot of chaos in my life growing up. And so by the time, I sort of reached my late teens and I'd been through some really difficult situations, even though I had a deep love of religion and I had a deep connection to some of those deities associated with Catholicism, the actual institution of that organized religion was really confusing for me as a teenager and honestly as a young woman. I couldn't understand why women couldn't be priests. I couldn't understand these thoughts around um, you know, not being accepting of homosexuality. I couldn't understand these thoughts on like family planning and abortion. None of it was made sense to me, and it felt really oppressive. And so I really turned my back on that religion, and and then things progressed, and what really progressed a lot was my drinking. And
Mm.
I there is this multi-generational alcoholism in my family, and I was pretty lost. And by my early 20s, I sort of took this whole sensitivity part of me, this deep thinking, creative part of me, and I just decided that I was just going to fit in, and I would just get a regular job and, go to the club and do what appeared to be a lot of other early 20-year-olds did. um, and that's what I did. I just decided to like follow this path that the mainstream told me that you should do. Go to school, get a job, have a boyfriend, have fun, go out. And of course, one of those things in Australia is travel. Like everybody travels there. It's part of, being that age group's rite of passage. So I came over to Canada. I'd always wanted to come here. I had quite a connection with this country because my aunt, who was a really important person in my life, she lived here for a number of years. And very, very quickly, within less than a year, I had reached an alcoholic bottom. And and when I quit drinking, which it sounds so easy. Yeah, I just quit drinking, but it's actually it was a very challenging thing to do. And the thing about that experience, though, was it left me with what some people would call the gift of desperation.
Mm.
I was really, really desperate to stop drinking and to stay stopped drinking. And I had burned down relationships with family and friends. I burned down career. And when you have that gift of desperation, um, I was doing a lot of praying, and a recovery community came into my life that was really based in spirituality
Mm.
and was not about religion. And I was very reticent and reluctant to explore spirituality. I had a huge resentment against God and the Catholic Church. Um, but through that, I found this women's circle, and we were, all into Starhawk and Clarissa Pinkola Estes and the Women Who Run with the Wolves, right? This is like 30 years ago, and we were all in recovery, and we all kind of had this gift of desperation, and we were all searching for feminine spirituality.
Mm.
And that was the first time in my life where I'd actually heard this word goddess. I had no idea that there was this whole world of feminine spirituality. So we met every week, and we were really serious about the journey that we were on. And it was very, there was no money exchange or anything. It's this person's turn to host at her house, and this person's turn to facilitate, and we would all bring some food for afterwards. And we just kind of were doing all sorts of things there, from like book studies to going out into the woods for nights on end to giving our moon blood to the earth, to like we were just doing it. And and at the same time, a friend had invited me also to Sweat Lodge with the Squamish Nation, First Nation here in Vancouver. And I went to that Sweat Lodge, and there was something about being in that womb space. There was something about being with the lodge elders and the fire keepers, and this deep love of Mother Earth. And it was very, very humbling.
Mm.
And so I had the women's circle going on. I'd been to the Sweat Lodge, and I was also in this therapy group run by a Jungian therapist who would do like guided visualizations with us. And that is when I discovered that I have this really like natural ability to go into other dimensions and communicate with other beings. And this would happen, and she would lead us on a guided visualization, and I would just go. I didn't even hear her voice, and I ended up having these experiences in the other realms where I met these beings that called themselves my ancestors.
Mm.
And they said things to me like, keep coming back here, like, keep coming back to us. And so I was doing these meditations like very often because I was at quite a desperate time in my life and talking to my ancestors, but I also had a lot of healing done in the spirit world with Jesus. He was like, so I had all
Mm.
this healing that happened around the wounding that I had experienced, by this institution of Catholicism. And I began to tease apart like the religion from the actual spiritual connection.
Wow.
Um, so that's kind of how it got started. And through the course of all of that, um, I I've been going to Sweat Lodge and a few other things, and I just didn't feel comfortable I wanted to explore more deeply into my spirituality, but I didn't want to explore more deeply into the spirituality of First Nations people because I just felt I didn't know these words appropriation in those days. I just intuitively knew, like, this is not for me. So, 5 years into my journey, I went to a workshop run by the Foundation of Shamanic Studies,
Mm.
and I was curious about this thing, shamanism, because I didn't realize that I was shamanic journeying when I was doing what I was doing. I didn't realize that I was having soul retrieval experiences when I was having this healing in my meditations. Um, but when I went to that workshop, um, I had made myself a little rattle out of, I don't know, some lentils and a little plastic container or whatever.
Awesome.
And the moment I sat in that circle and we were rattling and drumming, I just started to weep. And not kind of like the crying of grief, not like the crying of joy, just the weeping of knowing that I this is where I am meant to be.
Wow.
Hmm. And that happened the whole kind of weekend that I was there. I was like, God, I don't even know what it was. You know, there's all sorts of things that I could say to analyze that, but I just think that somehow my soul felt at home. And I would probably say that my soul and my being felt really safe.
Yeah. It,
Um,
it's
yeah,
amazing to me that I know in Western culture, crying is not always considered like appropriate, but I've noticed in those moments in my life where there are tears streaming down my face, but I could be talking to you like I'm talking to you now. And I feel like it's my soul talking to creator and just telling creator like what I don't consciously know. And I feel like anytime I cry like that, it is a signal to me to pay attention because your soul is speaking to you and trying to get your attention for something that you really need to know in that moment.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, those magical tears, you know?
Yes. Tears or prayers, I
Mm-hmm.
think it might have been Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I'm a big fan of her as well, but I think she
Mm-hmm.
put on the divine feminine onto my radar as well. And I think just listening to you recount your story and thank you for sharing all of that. But what really stood out to me is it sounds like you were really paying attention. You were going to all these different meetings that called to you, but you were paying attention to the messages that you received. And I know when we
Mm-hmm.
talked before, you had mentioned that going to Ireland for the first time and then going back several times after that was a really powerful part of your journey. And I would love if you could share a little bit more about like what finally pushed you to make the trip. And whatever you're willing to share just about what you learned about your ancestral lands and the ancestral teachings and how they helped you.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think I had been sort of on this path of, earth-based spirituality, you know, for probably about, I don't know, 10 years or something at this point, and shamanism or animism. And I actually, a lot of the time in my journey, I'm guided to do something through a dream. That's I'm a big dreamer. I really work with my dreams deeply, and even in some of the trainings I've done with Clarissa Pinkola Estes, it's such a big part of her work.
Mm.
But there are dreams that I have that are, some people might call them big dreams or visitation, but they're definitely have a lot more intensity to them. And I began to have these dreams of being visited by these three women, and one that had red hair, one that was very, very old and gnarly, and the other one I can't remember too much about. But um, when I have big dreams, what I do is I will meditate or go into a journey back into the dream to meet whoever it was that was coming through. And we were definitely standing on what appeared to be like the west coast of the Western Isles somewhere, you know, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, somewhere. And this old woman, she, you know, she was like, yeah, where are your ancestors? And it's like basically like you need to start listening to us. That's kind of like the Coles Notes of it. You need to start listening. And I wasn't really too sure about what to do about that. I just kept journeying. And then one of my journeys that I did, I was taken to this mountain, and inside this mountain, they pulled out a book and they gave me this book. And, you know, I'm trying to understand all this stuff. And she said, yeah, we need, you know, now is the time basically that this knowledge that we had as healers had to go underground, and like it needs to come back into the world, right? Anyway, I, through a series of, you know, zigzag path kind of thing, I ended up going to Ireland, and a friend there, also, I guess he would say he's a shamanic practitioner. And he was like, yeah, you don't need, you know, a teacher here. You just need to meet the land. And I didn't understand at the time that, like, I didn't really understand about this relationship with land in the same way that I do now.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So when I spoke to him about this old woman and these three women, and I started to look into, you know, the spirituality of Ireland and this understanding about the threefold goddess, like the Maiden Mother Crone and all the different three faces and the triple spiral and all of this, what I call the sacred three motif. And he just said, well, I'll just take you to meet the Kaliak. And the Kaliak is, she's a really old, maybe we could use the word goddess, who is all up and down the Western Isles. And she's been around since like Paleolithic times.
Wow.
And she's known as many, many things. She's known as the Storm Hags. She's known as the Daughter of the Bones. She's known as, you know, just she's this old woman, this very, very old, wise woman who's also very, very strong. And she's quite a formidable teacher. And I would say, like, she's been my spiritual teacher for all these years. And really, what I learned in Ireland is that the feminine there, then this is sort of my interpretation, but the feminine there is in relationship to sort of pre-pastoral ways where they would have, the year was divided in two halves, the little sun and the big sun.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So yeah, so the little sun is like from Samhain, the beginning of November, which is the new year, around to Bealtaine, which is in May, the festival of, you know, fertility, is just stepping into summer. And so in that maybe feminine half of the year, it is the Kaliak who is the one that comes as Samhain and says, all right, you know, everything now has to die or go to sleep. So she comes as the storms, she comes as the snow, she comes as the deep freeze, she comes as it's time to go back inside. All of that really winter energy, grandmother winter energy. And she is a formidable teacher in our culture because it's kind of going against what we're all doing here, you know, in the West, in North America, this whole thing of like what I call the unending summer. We live in the infinite summer where we just do, like, you know, everyone's burning out. No wonder there's so much fire. We're always in the summer. But she is like, okay, well, so you won't rest? You won't stop then, okay. And then she'll bring something into your life that will make you stop. You won't let go? All right, we'll just make this so uncomfortable till you can. So she's a big teacher about death and rest and going deep, deep, deep within. And then she transforms when you come around to the beginning of February. This is the time, the festival called Imolc, which means in the womb. And then she transforms into the beautiful maiden, Bridget. And so Bridget, or Breed, in the Western Isles, is also like a massive, massive, goddess, So when I went over there to Ireland, my friend was like, "Oh, you just need to go and meet her." And so it's not just like this one goddess, she's also like local. So there is a local Kaliak in all these places. There are local stories amongst the old people. There are folk tales. There are places on the land that are the Kaliak. So I've been to 4 or 5 different cairns or temples, sacred sites that are all dedicated to her. But the kind of vibe of the place, the stories of the place differ where you go. She's still this wily old woman, but she's she's a local being as well, and people really respect her. So if a storm comes in, or there's a rocky outcrop, or there's a tough, winter, it's all sort of connected to her.
Wow.
So I went to these places and I sat in her cairns, and I met her. That was in 2011, I think, and I just kept sitting with her and opening to that relationship with her as a teacher.
Wow. And that's amazing to me to hear, not just the legend of her, but also then the fact that you were out in nature connecting with the land while you were also connecting with these ancient stories and these ancient concepts. And I'm wondering if you said that when your guide said, you just need to meet the land, that you didn't understand like what that meant. Like, do you have a better understanding of like what he meant in that moment now that you've had these experiences out to these sacred places?
Yeah, for sure. Like, the land is a living being. And, it's something that I appreciate about animism. For me, anyway, it's really a pantheistic path. It's not monotheism, it's not polytheism, but it's pantheistic. It's like this one spirit, this one energy, this oneness, and that there is a drop of that oneness in everything, and that I think that there's an interconnection between people and animals and plants and weather that is all symbiotic. And when it's harmonized, there are all these doors that open where then a conversation will open. And so if you're at one of these places that's dedicated to the Kaliak, like I remember a place I went down to in Cork, and when the church came in, when the Catholic Church came in, if your baby was not baptized and it died, you could not bury it in the church graveyard with all the other people of your parish. So people would take their babies to this one particular very old cairn that was probably 3,000-4,000 years old, and they would give their baby to the Kaliak because she would take care of them. Right? So it's the old religion and the new religion. So I think that families, live on land for generation after generation, and the conversation that happens. Yes, I could say story, but sometimes in our culture, story is like make believe. People think it's fiction.
Okay.
So the conversation, the story, the narrative, I like to say the conversation because it's more reciprocal. People are out on the land, depending on the land, speaking to the old storm hag to, hey, can you just ease up on the snow right now? We've got this going on. Or so I really, in the stillness, in the quietness, when I sat in those places with her, and she said lots of things to me in those moments that I've been there. And yes, could I say, oh, it's my imagination, or, it's just, I'm just making something up? Sure. I just sort of go, well, is it helping? Yes, it is. All right, well, let's just carry on. But a lot of the time with these experiences, what happens is they get validated later in a different way. I'll open a book and I'll be like, oh my God, like that's what happened. It's like, not that I've read the book and had the experience, but I've had the experience and then I've found it somewhere.
Yeah, those moments of synchronicity. I always love that. That makes life so much more interesting and I think
Mm-hmm.
too I see it a lot in our culture today, and you mentioned like the fast-paced never-ending work of the Western world where people, it seems like, are trying to find an anchor, something that they can ground in, something that's real, something that's true, something they can trust. And we had talked before about how America is a land of immigrants. And you had mentioned, is there some kind of soul loss that happens when you leave those ancestral lands? And would love your thoughts on that, as well as, if you are here, do you have any tips for people to look into their ancestry or to reconnect with their ancestral roots?
Yeah. Well, yes. So,
Big question.
I've had this, yeah, no, I've had this thought, theory, feeling for a long time now. Just because I grew up living in Australia, I've been living in Canada for the last 30 years. I have this deep, deep connection to Ireland and other places around the world that I feel like I'm in conversation with. Um, but I do think when, you know, um, I started to explore this because, when I'm away from Australia, like I would say for me that like Australia is my motherland, right? And, Ireland is like my grandmother land, my grandparents, and Canada is kind of like my, I don't know, my auntie land or something, my adopted parents' land. But when was away from Australia for quite a while, I started to notice things. When the internet began and we didn't have to like send letters to each other, to stay connected, or I didn't have to like call my parents and they'd be like, "Oh, this is gonna cost too much. Get off the phone." I mean, they still act like that now anyway, but but then I started to realize, well, you know what, like I feel very connected to my family. Like they live, 8,500 miles away, but I know what's going on in their lives. I feel very connected to them. But I began to discover that going back to Australia is not about going to visit my family. Of course it is. It's great. It's nothing like it. But my God, this feeling of homesick for me is a feeling in my body. And it's when I'm away from that land too long. Because my whole body, all my DNA, perhaps all my whole being, the soul, my body, needs to be on the vibration of that land. I need to go and smell those smells and breathe that air and walk that land I have to go for my body.
Mm.
And so when I first went to Ireland, the wildest thing was that, I just got out of the airport and I just looked around. I could have wept in the airport because I was like, oh my God, like these are my people. There was just such a deep recognition. Besides that, there were a lot of people my height, which was really nice. um, but there was like a type of mirroring that happened there. There was this deep knowing, and then traveling around and learning the names of places. And I'm like, oh my God, the immigrants did just go over to Australia and like take all of this with them. And, the colonization is not a good thing, but I really did. And there's this deep soul, body, whole being, energetic recognition of these places. So I think about that, and I think about, my first trip to Ireland, we went to a specific circle, and we met the man there who he stewards the land and this sacred circle on the land. And his family has lived there for 9 generations,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And this wasn't the first time I'd heard this. There was another place that I went to, and where they refer to a place not as an it, as like if we talked about that stone circle, he said, "Oh, you're going over to meet them, are you?
Mm.
Not are you going to see the circle? You're going." And then I was at another place in Southwest Ireland, and I was going out to a particular rock there that is connected to the Cailleach Vera. And the woman at the Airbnb, she said, are you gonna go and meet her?"
Wow.
Just like so casual, just like, "Oh, are you heading out to meet her?" And I was just like, "Oh yeah." I was like, "Oh whoa," you know, this is like this is regular living. So when I met this guy, and I began to, we had a long chat with him, and talking about the circle and talking about sort of the responsibility of being that steward. And then I really began to think, wow, if you're ripped off that land, if during the famine, like how many millions of people had to emigrate, and there are all the stories on the land. There's the tree over there that, maybe all everybody's buried. Maybe there's a stream down there, and there's when a baby's born, we do this. So there are these relationships that are happening with the land and places on the land. And then if you're taken from that, how do you orient?
Mm.
Right? Your soul, your ancestors, the stories, because what are all the soul medicines? Songs, music, stories, dancing, ritual, ceremony, all of rites of passage. That's all soul, all language, it's all soul. So if you have to leave and you can't go back, I mean, in Ireland, if somebody was emigrating, they were leaving during the famine, like they would have their wake before they left.
Wow.
Yeah. So I began to think about, and then you go to a new place, and then you have to survive, and you're living in scarcity. And if you're coming from hunger physically, you're going to be carrying hunger spiritually too, sometimes on a soul level. If you're not getting those medicines that feed your soul that come with the land, then what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the same reverence for the land.
Yeah.
So I often look at colonization in the Western world and what we're doing to the land now, like just raping and mining and clearing and consuming. Basically, we're just consuming without thought, without consciousness. And I wonder if these mass immigrations, this disconnection from the land, and then not being able to maybe rebuild a new relationship because it takes generations, and not having maybe the practices, I don't know, but I have thought that connection with the land that is our soul connection really potentially got severed. And I would say that people likely left parts of their soul back at their homeland,
Mm.
And when you're experiencing that soul loss, you don't have all of you with you. And you need all of you with you in life. You need to be full. That's how you remain healthy.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little story about how this sort of happened to me when my daughter was about 2. Just under 2, I went back to Australia and had a big visit with my family. And it was very, very, very hard to come back to Canada. I had this new little baby that was just, my daughter's dad and I, and my whole family's in Australia, and I so really needed my mum, and I needed my brothers because they were parents too. And when I got on the plane to come home, I mean, I just felt that deep, like longing in my heart and in my chest and in my guts. And And I just said a little prayer to, spirit and to myself. And I just said, Angela, you need to bring all of your soul back to Canada with you, because this little child needs all of you with her, not part of you over there lamenting and yearning and longing. You need to come, and you need to be here. You need to land here. You need to do that so that the land knows that you're fully here.
Wow. I have heard of soul retrieval. I was on a reservation in South Dakota, actually, where I connected with an indigenous family there, and um, was teaching and dealing with, youth who were carrying significant trauma. And I remember one of the first things that they taught me was soul retrieval. And it was the first time I had heard that whether it's a great loss, like a loss of family or a loss of homeland or something that happens to you, the spirit almost disconnects so that it'll only return when it's safe once more to be in the body. And for me, they told me, just say your name out loud 4 times, your full name, like call yourself back. And I know in
Yeah.
different traditions that ceremonies can be much more elaborate, but can you share, like, how did you call yourself back? Because I mean, it's kind of a terrifying concept to me that you can be fully present one moment and then half of you or part of you is like floating around somewhere. Like, I
Mm.
understand that concept very deeply because I've definitely been there in my life where I'm like, something's not right. And I've used that ceremony
Mm.
where I'll be like, okay, come back, you're safe here. But for people who can't go travel to their ancestral lands, or for people whose life circumstances do pull them away from family or their homes or the lands that they love. I love this idea that you can call yourself back. Can you just share a little bit more about how you work with people on that, or what you do with your own self to, notice that something is not right? Because I think this might be a new concept for a lot of people. Like, I don't know many people who have heard of the terms like soul retrieval or soul loss.
Mm.
So maybe just start by saying,
Mm.
like, what is this soul lethargy? How do you know that a part of you is like not there? And then what do you do
Mm.
to just personally come back to yourself, or to help other people come back to themselves?
Sure. Yeah. Soul loss is, yeah, it's this understanding that a part of our soul will leave due to a trauma, or sometimes it can be a life decision that we make that's not the best for us. We overstay in an unhealthy relationship, or where we've got the golden handcuffs at work, and so there's this gradual whittling away of the soul, or we go through something really traumatic where, yeah, the soul, that part of our soul will, this, you hear these terms, oh my God, I was completely beside myself. It's like, yeah. Um, and so there's this traumatic experience, and the soul will come back when it knows that you're safe and the body is, healed somewhat. So, we can we we don't know oftentimes that we have soul loss, but some ways that you can know is that you just can't seem, you haven't been the same since something happened. You just haven't. You just know. It's like, yeah, that thing happened 35 years ago, and I haven't been the same since. That can be one way of detecting it. Another way of detecting it is that you just kind of, you're not feeling your full robust self. You're just feeling flat, lethargic, depressed. Sometimes people develop addictions because they're trying to feed this loss. Um, those are the kinds of signs, many more signs where that comes forward. But and so, yeah, what people can do is accept this one for sure, of just calling your name and setting an intention to call yourself back. um I like, you know um when my daughter was little, and she would have a bit of fall or something, and she'd be a bit shocked, and I would just get her to tap her heart, like the center of her heart, and I'd just say to her, just tell yourself to come back. And she would say, come back. And she'd say her name, come back. And, it just helps. But I think that, the medical world would call soul loss like shock, and the psychology world would call it dissociation. But in, the spiritual healing world, we would call it soul loss. So, first of all, just recognizing that you think that there's a potential that part of you is left. And so where do the soul parts go, right? So sometimes the soul parts will be actually stuck in the time and the place of the trauma. That's one thing that can happen. Sometimes soul parts will be in some other dimension or some other place where they once felt really, really safe. That's a safe place for them. Sometimes the soul parts, and I see this quite a bit actually, is a soul part will sort of get walled up inside a part of our body. Or a soul part will kind of be out in the field of the energy, but it's not in our body. And so some of the things that I get people to do is you can do it through your dreams. So I sort of say to people, like, create a little altar and have a candle and maybe find a picture of yourself where you can see in that picture that you're not all there. You just have to look in the eyes. People talk about this all the time. There's this photo that I have when I was 7 and I was da-da-da, and then there's this photo when I'm 11 and it's obvious, right? So if you put, that picture of that 11-year-old up there and then light a candle every night and then you just say, I'm ready, for you to return. And it's safe. And sometimes I get people to write a letter to that soul part and tell that soul part all about their life right now. I live here. I'm all grown up. I have this great job. This is my home. And there's this, letting this part of ourselves know to come back. So a lot of the time you can have, integration of a soul part. You have to be committed, honestly, to the integration part of soul retrieval, because you can have a soul part come back. But let's say, for example, you grew up in an alcoholic home that was chaotic and you happen to be living with a partner who's an alcoholic and your life is still chaotic. You can call the soul part back, but it may not stay, right? So quite often there's big work that has to accompany the integration phase of soul retrieval.
Okay.
And then when I work with people, I generally go through a process of anywhere between 3 and 6 week process, where I teach people how to journey and I get them connected with an animal ally. And when you would have a practitioner help you with soul retrieval is when that soul part, it's not happening. And you're not going to journey to meet that soul part because the situation is just too traumatic to go back into, and we don't want anybody re-traumatizing themselves. So when you work with a practitioner, it's great because the practitioner can go and find the soul part and then do spiritual healing work with them on the other side. So there's not as much charge with that soul part when it comes back. And then they can work with you to help you to be able to integrate whatever comes up, and also to make the changes in your life so that you can fully integrate this essence. So it's not like parts work. It's not like inner child work or that I have this part of myself. When you do soul retrieval, you're retrieving a part of your essence that is stuck in time and space. And when you bring it back, you go through a process so that it integrates back into you so that you actually end up with more energy and more, but you're not continuing to visit that part of yourself. It integrates into your whole being.
Wow. That's so interesting. I'd never thought of it like that. I know when I was studying psychology, you would learn, because I worked with a lot of people with significant trauma, and you would learn a very accepted in our Western society view that, if a really momentous trauma happens in your life, that therapists would often see their patients stuck, like you said, that word stuck at that moment. So you might have a very successful businessman or businesswoman who's very capable of doing like high powered tasks, but at the emotional level of a 12-year-old, or again, no like disrespect to 12-year-olds. I know amazing 12-year-olds, but it's just like, and
Yeah.
that in psychology, that's very accepted that when these things happen, you can get stuck. And like you said, it does take that deep work. And I love that you brought in a practitioner or someone guided who can help you. And just going back to your own journey when you mentioned finding the communities that introduced you to Sweat Lodge or the Women's Circle, that aspect of community, I feel like is really a powerful element of countering some of this disease that we see so prevalent in our society. And I know too, you mentioned, I loved what you were sharing earlier about when you went to Ireland and they said, are you going to go meet her or are you going to go meet them instead of the circle? And just, I love your reverence for nature. And I know that that's a key part of animism too, is just recognizing, like you said, the oneness of everything and that everything has a spirit.
Mm.
Um, and just switching gears a little, can you talk a little bit about animism and just,
Yeah.
there's this quote on your website and you wrote it so beautifully that I'm just gonna read it so people can hear it. But you wrote that the wisdom of nature shows us that there's a reason and meaning to the interconnection of every being in every moment. There is also truly a deep mythic meaning to your life and your reason for being here at this time. And I read so much of your writing because I just kept getting more and more inspired, but I love that you seem to have found great purpose and strength and meaning just in your connection to the natural world. And can you talk a little bit about that and whether you think being
Mhm.
out in nature can help people, especially if they're doing this like deep soul work?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I just want to make one more, I just want to actually say, if you don't mind,
Sure.
just say one more thing about the soul retrieval just before we move on. I've really, really come to deeply enjoy in my work with clients is because I'm also a somatic counselor. I can see when doing spiritual healing or soul retrieval with people, I also work with them with somatic work at the same time.
Mm.
So many times, if we're very carefully somatically working on an aspect of a trauma, people will say these things very naturally. And they'll say something like, yeah, God, in this moment, I feel like there's a part of me here that I completely forgotten about. So
Mm.
it's like this totally natural thing. So I found that working with the nervous system and, safely helping people to titrate the energy that is associated with trauma, that stuck energy, that when we do that somatic work, it creates space. And there's quite a spontaneous soul retrieval happens quite regularly in
Wow.
sessions. So I just wanted to sort of mention how those pieces work together because it's something that I really enjoy and I think is really powerful because we're really becoming so much more embodied in that, in that way.
Yeah, and
Um,
please definitely feel free to talk more about that if you'd like, because I think I was listening to a clip from one of your other interviews where you mentioned that as a somatic healer, a client can come to you and they don't have to go through their trauma. They don't have to relive all of that and become re-traumatized, that you can just see in their body. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think an important part of the spiritual path is being in your body. I mean, this wasn't on the question sheet. So, I mean, if you want to answer it, you don't have to. But I know that so many times in my own spiritual studies, it's all about being way up here. You need to transcend the world. You need to control your mind. You need to deny your body. And it's that it wasn't until I found feminine divinity that talked about like the path of the goddess descending and going
that's right.
underground and being in your body. And I was like, "What?" And so it's newly on my radar, like, the importance of your body not being an inconvenience, not being something that you don't love, but the power of your body as a spiritual temple. And I am also a recovering Roman Catholic, so I don't know what you learned about, but I learned like the body is sinful and this is sinful and you can't trust your sensations and like don't have these thoughts and don't experience pleasure. I mean, that's how it came across to me, even though it's not that for every Roman Catholic. And so I'm glad you took us down this tangent because, like, paying attention to your body, especially in our fast-paced world where there is this big disconnect between your brain and what your body is trying to tell you. Like, if you would like to talk about the somatic healing you do, by all means, like, please do, because I think it's a really
Yeah.
important part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very important what you're talking about there, Lex. This is very important because I believe that this is the roots. This is the junction of the old religion and the new religion,
Mm.
right? So the old religions, of course, people are animist. You know, the word animism, if you think about animation, right? The roots of animism, I'm just going to look at my notes here
Yeah.
because
Go
I
for
want to
it.
make sure I get this. You know, the roots of animism, there's a Proto-Indo-European root of an or an or ain, A-N-E, and that is really connected to meaning breath. So there are many cultures that have this same root word that translates as breath or soul or wind or even the four directional winds. So in Greek, the word is animos, meaning wind, and in Old Norse, the word is anda, meaning to breathe, and in Old Irish, anam, and in Sanskrit, aniti or anila for breath. So this whole idea of breath, wind, soul, life is connected to the roots of the word animism. So this this piece of the ancestral ways of these people were living in an animist way. If you're going to the same well every day to collect your water, if you're in reciprocity with the land, there's that relationship, there's that conversation. Now, when new religions come in, when I think about what they're saying, my experience anyway was like, yes, if you do this, 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 and this, you're going to go to a much better place than here, right? So being here is not so important, but doing the right things, and serving this in this way is going to take you out to this place way up there in the light where you will then experience redemption if you've done a good enough job here. And there was a big separation between the land and the people because they wanted them to go to the church. They wanted to break the soul of the people. It's part of the tactic of colonization. So Catholicism, I mean, we kept Mary, and I've heard many stories of people who've said, the only reason they kept Mary was because when, the Catholics came to certain places and they got the local people to build the temples or the churches, they were goddess-based people, and they would, Mary was like kind of like the goddess.
Oh,
Do you think about
wow.
Tonantzin and Guadalupe, right? It's the same. It's the earth goddess. So it's like the way that the people kind of, all right, you want to call her Mary? We'll call her Mary. Okay, whatever you want to call her. Like,
Wow.
yeah. And so, but they're having this whole thing about, this idea that the soul is unblemished. The soul is this one light, that you're born, a certain way. And we don't trust your body. Well, because it's like your body is the earth. This is what I teach all the time to my students. You have your own little mini Mother Earth right here, right? You've got your earth, you've got your trees, you've got your plants, you've got your blood is your water, your air is moving around in there. Like we're like a little microcosm of Mother Earth. So as long as we're trying to leave our body or trying to be somewhere else, we're missing out on our choice to have a human experience. And being a human experience, having a human experience is to be in your body and to, have this relationship happening between your soul and your body, your mind and your body. It's all, we all know, right? It's all interconnected. So I think that a lot of this like lack of embodiment, or religions that want to destroy the earth, destroy your body, or even religions that have a hatred for the feminine, that need to control the feminine. Um, it's all connected to the feminine, like the body, the earth, you know. So I think that part of our work on the spiritual path is to be in deep connection and reverence for our body, as its own planet, as its own earth, and coming home to our body can be, it's its own journey, coming home, because what a lot of addictions, whatever they are, and I think especially as women, I mean, the moment that we move into puberty, it's like our body isn't even our own anymore, right? It's just a source of, you know, observation and critiquing by everybody else, and this systemic um, disconnection from our body being free to be as it wants to be, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that what we then learn to do is we learn to override the body. So whether we're doing that, like I did with drugs and alcohol, or whether we're doing it with overworking, whether we're doing it by trying to control like diets and food and fitness and all this kind of thing, that's not about love. That's about control, you know?
Yeah.
And that's because we're doing it because our body is like, hello, can
Yep.
we have a conversation?
Yep. And then it just keeps getting louder and louder. I definitely believe that when you have like a somatic complaint, I always, it's psychosomatic. Something is going on in your mind or your spirit that you're not paying attention to. And I feel like sometimes it takes, passing out or cutting a serious health complaint to realize like you're not listening to me. And like you said before, now I'm going to put something into your life to make you realize that something isn't
Yeah,
right here, and you need to pause and assess and figure out what you need to change to bring that harmony back into your life. So,
very much. And I think that, the medical world is so desensitized, right, to the body. And I was taught, in my training around soul retrieval, that all of the organs and parts of your body also have their own soul. So I've worked with many women who've had mastectomy, where we have brought the soul of their breasts back, or they're heading in to have mastectomy, and they can go through a process of still maintaining and keeping the soul of their breasts, even though they're saying goodbye to this part of their body. Women who have
mm,
had hysterectomy, because the soul of your uterus is like so important, you know. So I think that that can be a very empowering thing, for people when they're working through physical things, to be connected to the soul essence of that part of their body.
it's really interesting. Yeah, I guess as a woman, I've been very lucky because I was raised in a family that was like substance and strength over pretty or popularity. And so when I
Yeah,
see what young women today are struggling with, it breaks my heart because I personally believe every woman is complex and beautiful, and so and men too. I mean, we're like we all have a reason that we're here or we wouldn't be here. Um
exactly.
but I know too, just developing my own relationship with nature where it's like, I love my body. My body can hike 6 miles or 10 miles, or, you mentioned you're a mother, like you created a life and you brought that into the world. Like that's amazing. Like that's completely amazing.
Yeah,
And just looking in the body in the terms of like y- it's just such an amazing, or even just the body's ability to heal. Like you get a cut and it just heals. Like that always amazes me that like our body just naturally knows how to heal itself. So
yeah, yeah. It's going on in nature too, right?
yes,
Trees continue even though they lose a branch, right?
right. Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
So I wanted to shift just a little bit, and I'm watching the time. I want to be mindful of your time, so thank you. But you've helped so many people with the healing work you've done, and I can only imagine that as you're leading people into journeying and all of this information is coming up to them or something is being made aware to them in dreams. I'm sure it's not always pretty or easy, or, you mentioned just weeping in your own journey and that signaling to you. Like, I feel like a lot of weeping happens in healing, and would just love to hear from you. Like, how do you stay grounded in order to like keep your center to be that healing space? Because
Mhm.
one of the things I've heard about you is like you safely hold space for others and that you're known for doing that. And that is not easy. And so I can only imagine how much self work you've been able to do. And just,
Mhm.
is it a daily practice of just carving out time to yourself to give yourself what you need? Um, and you mentioned living with the cycles of nature. Like, we're not meant to go so fast all the time. Like, taking time to rest is really important. And I'm sure there's so much you could say about that, but could you just share your thoughts on like how do you take care of yourself and in order to
Mhm.
be that space not just for yourself but for others?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, a few years ago, as much as I understand this word healing, um, a few years ago, I started to just this change or practice using the word transform rather than heal.
Oh.
Because in reality, like, the work is never done because we are forever evolving and we are forever interacting with the world around us, and we are as impacted, even though it is an inside job, we are still impacted by everything that's going on in the world around us. And
Mm.
so, one thing that I have learned, like from one of the really wise people in my life, is, I change up my self care all the time. I don't have a specific um, routine that I get into. I just, observe myself. And um, so depending on what is going on in my life, will lead me to lean into parts of my practice that I can tell are going to help me. So, these last 5 years of my life have probably been the most challenging 5 years of my adult life. I went through this conscious uncoupling with my partner of 29 years, and our daughter was a teenager, and she was, you know, I had to, I could feel her slipping through the cracks, and, just all sorts of things. It was very, very challenging. And I had a very busy, caseload of clients and teaching in the apprenticeship and all sorts of things. And, you know, um, I had a lot of fear going on because the life that I had mapped out, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I know what I'm going to be doing. It's like, no, it's no,
Yeah.
And so, I have very lovely teachers and elders in my life. And I don't care if I'm 75, I'm still going to be turning to them because I just don't know. You need to have people, human beings. On the spiritual path, a lot of people say, oh, the medicine teaches me. And so, no, traditionally, you always have human elders because
Okay.
they know when it's safe for you to be exploring things. So, I turned to them for sure. And during that time, I could really feel that, I was undernourished on
Mhm.
sort of many levels, and I needed to like basically get your shit together because I had a child, and I had to like suck it up and make myself very strong, kind of thing. And so, what I did do during that period of time, I gave a lot of gifts and offerings to Mother Earth.
Mm.
And this is a practice that I recommend to a lot of people, or in all sorts of different ways. I would make beautiful little, mandalas on the ground. Um, or I would go outside and just, I always say to people, like, you have everything that you need in your kitchen pantry, you know? You
Okay.
do not need to go to some new age store and buy all this stuff. And, what I was needing at that time in my life was like, I was needing grounding. I was needing sustenance. I was needing sweetness because I felt so sad. I had so much grief. And other days I kind of needed sustenance and strength. And I think for me, with my ancestors, like maybe that's bread. I get some bread and, you know, whatever, and I go and bury it. Or I was having a hard time letting go. I couldn't let go. So I would take some flowers or some flower petals and go to the ocean, because the ocean can take all your tears. And I would ask the ocean, can you please help me? This grief is too much for me. Can I give this to you? And I would give my grief to the ocean. Or, I was so confused, and I needed to get clarity. So I would take some salt and give it to the stream and say, can you help me to have clarity? So I did a lot of that really deep, daily connection with Mother Earth, because anything that I will ask her, she will bring it to me, as long as my eyes and my ears and my heart are open to receive, right?
Yeah.
So that's a practice I do a lot. Is I give offerings to Mother Earth. It's a big part of my practice. And then I might, yes, for sure, rest. As I often say to people, I've been on the burnout train more than once, and I have had to really like break the back of my people pleasing. I've had to really have boundaries, and that has been a big challenge for me, because, in all honesty, I kind of feel like if I was a male leader and teacher and I said no, I probably wouldn't get the same flack that I've received from people when I've said no. That's no, you know? People don't like to hear no in our culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've just had to, have boundaries and learn how to have boundaries and still keep an open heart. And the other thing is, like, really, really embracing my compassion for myself and everything that I've been through in life. Um, and, friends and family who've been through just as much, if not more. Um, and I think that, we hear this term compassion fatigue, you know, and I've heard that if you have compassion fatigue, it's because you're not deeply compassionate enough with yourself.
Hmm.
You reach a limit,
Yeah.
and you see this in people, where people are having problems and they're having difficulties, and the person who's in that helping position can get frustrated or whatever. It's because their tolerance for that person being in that position it's not enough. We
Yeah.
have to expand our complexity tolerance. We have to expand our compassion, and to trust that they are exactly where they need to be. And, I know that when I'm holding space, and I love this little prayer that, when I went and sat with Clarice Piccola Estes, she says, Creator, please make me small enough and clean enough,
Hmm.
that I can make it through this little doorway, and I always say, make me small enough and clean enough, and I can get through this little doorway. Getting through the eye of the needle, right? You have to have humility. And
Hmm.
then that's how, when you have that humility and you're in right size, when you get through to the other side and you're with the medicine, or you're in ceremony, or you're, doing healing work with people, there is so much help. I actually always say that the ancestors are holding the space for me.
Oh,
My
wow.
teachers in the medicine lineages, they're holding the space for me. As long as I call them in, I'm in right relationship with them, that, I'm acknowledging them, I'm acknowledging where I learned something, I'm mentioning their names, I'm giving them love, I'm sharing my gratitude in my prayers for them. It's like when I go into a space and I do all of that, it's like I open the door and they're just all there, and they hold the space, and then I'm just working in the space.
That's really beautiful. It's that community again, that you're not alone ever. Like, whether you tune into community or you tune into yourself or you tune into nature, I just, throughout this entire conversation, just your emphasis on connection and just, taking the time to find that and to trust that and to honor that. I think the honoring sometimes gets left out a lot. I see a lot of people just going from spiritual path to spiritual path to workshop to workshop to workshop without ever realizing. I love that you said everything you need is in your kitchen pantry, and just for the ritual aspect of it. And it's just like everything you need is in yourself. One of my teachers told me it's just you have to remove the barriers so that you can access it, but it's already there.
Mhm.
And what you said too, just about being enough in the moment and letting things unfold in the moment. I know that was a really powerful teaching for me when I was burned out with where I was, and I stayed in that situation because I believed if I don't do this, no one else is going to. If I don't keep giving, there's going to be suffering. And
Mhm.
it was an indigenous teaching where the gist of it was I can't paraphrase these beautiful words from all these like really intelligent people, but it was basically like if you stay in a situation that is bad for you, you can't help others because the energy isn't right, the healing isn't right. And I stayed. I didn't listen to that, and I slowly realized I was trying to empower my youth, but it crossed that line. And I'm sure you've seen this as a parent too, where if you do everything for your kid, they don't learn those boundaries. They don't learn the like, I can say no, or I shouldn't have done this because that didn't turn out so great. So it was a very fine line between empowering and enabling. And I think that what you
Yeah.
said about just honoring your limits and giving yourself compassion, um, and yeah, realizing that with transformation or transformative work, it is bigger than you, and that yeah, like with nature, nature doesn't hurry, right? Lao Tzu said that, yet everything is accomplished. And I love that because I feel like in my life, I just keep rushing and rushing. And I'm like, I'm being even less productive because our human brains can only take so much. But if you look out your window and you realize like it's snowing and it's time to be quiet and to go within and to rest, it's like this is actually what's natural, like you said, like not working yourself into the ground, like that's what we do, that's what's been normalized, but it's not necessarily healthy and it's not good for us or anyone else. And so having those boundaries and messaging those boundaries to other people is also hopefully you're planting a seed to them. They might not like when you say no to them, and it might not feel good to get whatever reaction they give, but you've planted that seed of like this might be your normal, but it's not my normal, and it's not even necessarily what should be quote unquote normal. So,
Exactly. And I do think, you know, I do think that what we're doing when we're doing that is like, I mean, we're forever, my work is forever like trying to hew, the ego, right? Because the ego is always like, oh, I don't need that. I'm better than that. Or, I'm scum of the earth and therefore I'm not worthy. It just vacillates, between all of that. And so I know that, a big part of my world is, I am connected all these years later to a recovery community.
mm,
And I have friends that they don't give a crap what I do for work. They don't even know like what I do or whatever. But they're the kind of people that, it's all about the humility,
mm,
and that if I can't say no, really, and I can't have boundaries, all honesty, like it's pretty egocentric. It's like that, in one way I'm saying if I can't say no to people, I'm saying, oh, that there's nobody else out there that can help them, that I'm the one. Or I'm
so
afraid,
mm,
right? That if I don't help them, then they're going to get mad at me, right? It's very, very self-centered. It's very ego-centered. So, having clean and clear boundaries, you're just saying, I know myself enough to know that these are my limitations and I have to honor my limitations because otherwise I'm not going to do a good job. I'm not going to be, in good
mm,
service to you,
mm,
you know?
yes.
So, yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting
Yeah.
thing.
But just in our last few minutes, is there anything that you would like to share, just anything in this moment that your heart would like to share with the people who will be listening to this? Anything we've talked about or anything we didn't cover that you just feel is important to speak life to in these last few minutes?
Yeah, I think, what I would like to say to people, this is something that I learned because I lived in the same place, in the same area. I've been living in the same area for 27 years, but I lived up on the mountain for about 18 years, and I lived by this ravine. And over those 18 years, I really learned about the rhythm of nature. I really learned that, oh, the bear would pass by at the same time, and oh, this is the time where the raccoons are, oh, the squirrels are. And it was just by looking out my window every day or stepping outside and having my tea outside, or, if it's one thing that I would suggest to people is like, try to have a visit, whether it's your yard or whether it's somewhere else, like every day, just to stop and watch, just to stop and watch. Because as much as nature feels unpredictable, it's quite predictable. There's a rhythm there that's happening. And then the other thing, I often suggest to people is it can be the smallest thing, but if you're leaving your house and you're going out and you're getting in your car, for example, and you pass by the same tree every day, just see what it's like to stop and say hello to the tree. Like imagine if the two trees there next to the car were people and you went every day, you'd be like, hey, how's it going? And then maybe the conversation will be a little bit more. It's just like, oh, it's a nice day out today. Oh, got to look out for, you'd start to have this thing going on. And so I often suggest that to people. See if there is part of your daily routine. Like just, you don't have to go and do anything special because it's all right there. It's just that we're insulated from it. So if you're in underground parking in your apartment, um, step out onto the balcony, and observe that tree or observe that flower bed. Just observe, just see, because it is then when you start to observe enough, then you can start to do this thing of like be standing there thinking about something and then observe and see what happens, because quite often in Ireland they call them the fairy winds. You can be walking along and have a thought come and then there's this gust of wind and it's like, right? So
Amazing.
that's just a way to begin to open the door a little bit, because you may, like, they know that you're there. Right? The trees by the car, every day are feeling you,
Yeah.
So how beautiful to just see what happens if you have a bit of a connection.
I absolutely loved hearing Angela's insights about the connection between our ancestral lands and reverence for the earth, as well as how we can start cultivating a closer connection to the natural world through daily interactions and gratitude offerings. You can find links to her website and Instagram in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time to travel with me today. May any words or wisdom that resonated stay with you and grow in the upcoming days. Till next time, stay wild and rooted in compassion.